Hey everyone, Wayne Fox with the video today about scanning. I've done several videos about this Epson fast photo scanner, and I've had a few people ask about why I use such a low setting on the resolution. And I get asked frequently when I sell a scanner what settings should be used. And it's a little confusing, and the bottom line is there's no one right answer. What you really have to do is answer three questions. What are you going to do with the scan? What might you want to do with a scan in the future? And what's the historical significance of what you're scanning? And you can use those to kind of determine. There's a lot of things you have to decide. First of all, there's resolution, and that confuses a lot of people because it's everything from 75 all the way up to like 12,000. And then they want to know if you want to do a JPEG or a Tiff file. And if you choose a JPEG, they want to know if what you want to compress it to from 0 to 100. And they ask you things like, sharpening and color restoration, a lot of settings. So I thought I'd try to do a video that explains all those a little bit. Not that I'm going to tell you which setting to use. I just want you to understand why you would use particular settings and the advantages of one over the other. So the first one let's talk about is the resolution setting. Now what the scanner is asking you is how many pixels per inch you want to create. It's incorrectly labeled DPI in most scanning software, which stands for dots per inch, something a scanner or a printer does, but they get used interchangeably all the time now. I don't even differentiate much anymore. So anyway, what it's saying is for every inch of original, how many pixels do you want the scanner to make? For example, one video I watched recommended that you create 4,000 pixels in the long dimension. So if I had a 3.5 by 5 photograph, I'd have to scan this at about 800 pixels per inch to get my 4,000 pixels. If I had, for example, a 35 millimeter negative or slide, I'd have to scan that at around 3,000 pixels per inch, and I would still get a 4,000 pixel file when I'm done. If I had a 11 by 14 or something big like this, I'd only have to scan that at 300 pixels per inch. So you can see the reason for all the settings is because we have such a wide variety of originals we want to scan. That's one of the main reasons. So how big a file do you need to make when you scan your original images? Is 4,000, for example, the right number, which was recommended by a channel which is mainly about genealogy work? Well, it probably isn't most of the time. And what you need to understand are two things. First of all, what you're going to do with the file, and that'll affect how big you really need to make it. And second, the time it will take to scan based on your settings, and that's really a critical factor. What we're going to assume here is you're watching this because you've got some old family snapshots and things like this to scan. It's not like you're doing onesie twosie, but for example, you might have like 5,000 of these 3.5 by 5s like I did. So if you were to scan those on a flatbed scanner and you decided to use 1200 PPI or DPI because that would get you close to your 4,000 pixels, it'd be a little more than that, but that's the closest you can get. It would take you about 30 to 45 seconds to lay 5 of them out, hit the scan button, preview scan button, and then hit the actual scan button. Now the scanner is going to find each of the individual photographs, and then once you start scanning, it'll scan each of those 5 photographs into its own file. It takes a minute per photograph for the scanner to do that. Now some of the newer scanners are a little faster than that, but not a lot. So it'll take you about 5 minutes to 6 minutes per 5 photographs. If you've got 5,000 photographs, that's going to be 6,000 minutes it's going to take you to do that. That's 100 hours. That's a lot of time. 2 or 3 hours a day, it's going to take you a few months. And I think by the time you're done, you're going to be just wishing you'd have done something different. So let's suppose you decided to scan at 300 DPI instead of 1200. Well, now the scanner only takes 10 seconds per scan. So now you're going to scan every 5 and 2 minutes instead of 6 minutes. So you're going to cut your time down to 1/3 of the original time. So instead of 1,000 hours, now you're only looking at 300 hours. Still a lot of hours, but it's certainly a lot more doable. Now, in this particular scanner here, which is what I encourage you to look at, if it's extra money and it doesn't serve the dual purpose, but this scanner can do that in 1 per second. So now you're talking about a couple of afternoons, which is all it took me to scan mine. So the question then, is that enough? Is that enough information? And that's what you have to decide what you're going to do with the scan. And let's talk about which kind of data you need to do various tasks. So most people, what they're trying to do is get them so they're in a accessible format on the cloud or somewhere like that, so friends and family can look at them. They're going to be looked at on a TV or a computer screen or a phone. And to be honest, you don't need nearly that many pixels to get a good looking image on the TV. Even if it's a 4K TV, you're sitting far enough away that a simple 1,500 to 2,000 pixel image file looks just fine. In fact, let me just show you, I'm going to scan this picture here. Let me just show you how you get to a point where scanning any higher doesn't really gain anything. So here we have original I scanned in. This is one of the higher resolution scans. And let me just step through the different pictures. This is if you would scan at 75 pixels per inch. And you can see it's a little blurry, a little soft on your TV, but understand your TV's only got 1,000 pixels or maybe 2,000 pixels of vertical resolution. And you're stretching those 375 up. As we go through this, 100 PPI, 150, as we go through this, you'll see that it gets sharper and sharper. And when we get about to 240, it's going to look about as good as it's going to look on the device you're watching it on. As I go from 300 to 400 to 600 to 1200, you're really not seeing a gain in anything. So if your end goal is to sort of make sure that you can view them on these types of devices, no reason for 4,000 pixels. But what if you want to print them? And that's kind of what I wanted to address in the video as well, because a lot of times the scan is kind of a backup to the print. Now, I'll be honest, I don't think anybody's looked through these old boxes of photographs for a decade or two. Maybe we've gone through once in a while to find some individual ones, but they're going to be a lot more accessible once I get them on the cloud, which is what I'm doing for my family. But my goal was, when I scan these, I wanted to make an equivalent size of print that's as good a quality or maybe even a little better. And I tested at 300 DPI, I can get just as good a print, or it's actually better than the original. And I'm not going to have you take my word for it. In a minute, I'm going to have some people actually do some comparisons. I printed these strips from about 8 or 10 different settings on these scanners, and we're going to just see their reaction to comparing the different things. But understand, when we're printing it, we need to understand what the printer needs, and that's really what we want to talk about. So when I send a file to a printer, it's going to have so many pixels, and the printer's going to have to take those number of pixels and then enlarge them or shrink them based on what the printer's resolution is. For example, most printers work at around 300 DPI. My Epson printer that I have is a 300 DPI device. Some Epson printers are 360. But what we're going to say is, okay, if we print this at so many pixels per inch, this is the size of file we'll get. So, for example, if I scan these at 300 PPI, I'm going to get a 1,500 pixel file. And if I printed this at 150 pixels per inch, that's going to give me a 10-inch print. If I printed them at 300 pixels per inch, that's going to give me a 3.5 by 5. So if I scan at 300 PPI and I print at 300 PPI, I get the same size of print. Now, when you are sending this to the printer, the key is what DPI do you need to give the printer to get good quality? For example, the 3x5, it's 1:1. If we want to print an 8x10, we've got to make 2,100 pixels. So the printer would have to work at about 215 DPI. Now, the printers are really good about enlarging these images and make them look good. And it's surprising how good they are. And if you decided to print at 150 PPI, then you'll get an 8x10. And I've got 8x10s printed from 1200 and 300. I've got 5x7s printed from different ones. And I actually sat down with quite a few people. And what I want to do is just kind of show you in the video. I've got my 2 daughters, and kind of watch how careful they have to look to try to tell the difference. And what you're going to find out, as long as you print at about 150 PPI or DPI or 100, even 25 DPI, you can get a really good print. And especially considering that most people, my daughters are looking at them like this, but these are going to be sitting on a piano. I mean, you can't tell the difference between the 1200 and 300 DPI print and an 8x10 hardly at all. So let me just show you what their reaction was real quick. This is my daughter, Alicia. We're going to just compare these. So what do you think of the ones in the originals compared to that strip?
Well, looking at them, I think that they have better color. They look about the same. Maybe even a little better than the originals.
Okay. So this is my daughter, Brenna.
Hello.
And we're going to start by compare the originals in your right hand with the strip of copies on the left side. Just
put them side by side.
If you want, whatever works for you.
Yeah, these ones look a little clearer and brighter.
Okay. All right, good. Compare that one to that one.
Okay. They look about the same to me. Oh. Yeah, they look about the same. Like, I keep thinking, well, that one's a little sharper, but then I see something, the other one, that I say, well, that is sharper in that one.
All right. So pretty much the same, basically.
Yeah, I would say definitely
Right.
pretty much the same.
Okay. And it's quite okay to say you can't see any difference at all.
I can't see much, no.
Can you see it? Is either of them any sharper?
This one seems a little sharper to me.
Okay. Interesting.
Especially the top one, but...
All right, we're going to compare this one
Okay.
to this one.
Again, pretty similar. This one on the right maybe looks a little bit crisper. Maybe just a little bit, but
I feel like this one's better than this one, but I don't know. It's hard to tell.
Okay, that's fine.
this one's definitely a little warmer. A little less gray tones, which to me helps it look a little more, the face is a little more clear. If I look at the smaller details, this one's a little more clear on those, but as far as the faces go, these two?
Yeah.
These two are a little more the same color tone. Let's say they're about the same.
Okay. Compare this one to this one.
This one has that color change again
Right.
with the warmer, which I like. And the smaller details, like I noticed Mom's necklace here is a little sharper here.
Okay. A
And
little,
there's-
when you say little, you're taking,
Well, like little, like I'm looking for differences specifically, but I probably wouldn't notice it otherwise.
yeah, only if you're hunting for it. And have,
Yeah,
Only
yeah.
if you're side by side.
Yeah, for sure.
mean,
like
if-
I
if-
wouldn't look at this one
If
and
you had,
say,
if you went and
"Oh,
paid
here is-"
somebody to scan that and make you that 8x10, would you be happy with that?
I would be.
Yeah, the one on the right still looks better to me. I don't know, actually. I like the crisp of this, but I
Okay.
like the color of this. This is too blue for me.
Okay, so here's the question. If you went to a company, let's take this one out, give you the original. All right, if you took those to a place and said, can you scan me this picture and make me an 8x10, and you paid them money and that's what you got from them, would you be happy with it?
Yeah, I think I'd be fine because it's still...
Still good?
Yeah, the color's still a lot better in this one than in this one.
Okay.
And everybody looks good in it.
Okay. Okay, so the reason I did that is I can't show you this in a video like this. This is only 1080p video. I certainly can't show you any differences. So between this and all the other people, there's a couple things I discovered. First of all, most of them thought the 300 ppi scan versus the 1200 ppi scan from the flatbed scanner side by side, they thought the 300 ppi scan was actually better to make 3x5s. Well, that makes sense. If I scan this at 1200 ppi, I only need 1,500 pixels, and now I've got 6,000 pixels. And the process of shrinking that all down will cause a little bit of softness. It's got to throw pixels away, decide what pixels to merge, and it looks pretty good. And to be honest, you got to look at those really side by side. You got to be really close. I have to put reading glasses on to see any difference at all, and even then, I'm not sure I'm seeing a difference. So if you scan too high, it's not a problem as long as you're willing to put the time in. But I thought that was interesting. The other thing I decided that, you know, the 8x10, some of the reason the other one was sharper is because of the scanner. It's quite obvious. I didn't show it on the video of them comparing the 300 to the 1200 from the same scanner, but the 300 ppi scan from this scanner made to an 8x10, so now we're only 150 dpi to the printer. We've got to interpolate that up. It's a little better than this one, and that makes sense. This is a print moving across a linear device, so the accuracy is not real good. Here you've got the stationary print and an incredibly accurate linear device, which can actually resolve down to 12,000 pixels per inch. So you're going to get a little cleaner scan. If you know you're going to make an 8x10, then yeah, it would make sense to scan it at a little higher resolution. But let's talk about even then, it might be too high to go to 1200 or to get 4000, because what you've got to decide is how much resolution does my original actually have that I can capture. For example, a photograph like this is photographic paper made on a high-speed machine with mediocre lenses, might have been taken with an Instamatic camera with a plastic lens. You just don't have a lot of detail in there to capture. The paper itself can't resolve higher than about 400 to 450 pixels per inch. So even if it's a really crisp, well-made print, you maybe can get more out of it. But anything over 600, you're not going to get anything at all on something like this. So maybe scan at 600 if you know you're going to make an 8x10, but I think you'll actually be pretty happy if you scan it at 300. If it's a black and white print, a little different, because here the actual silver is what you're seeing. And because of that, it's much sharper. Here you have to, the process actually replaces the silver with dyes, and those dyes are not sharp little tiny crystals of silver. So you can scan an 8x or a black and white glossy, especially at a little higher setting if you want to make something larger. Obviously, if you're only going to make it the same size as the original, there's no reason to go over 300 ppi because you're not going to see any difference at all. If you're scanning something that's really important, especially if it's historically important, you might want to scan it. Then the idea of getting more is better. If you're the historian of a important organization and you're trying to preserve some stuff from 100 years ago, saving time probably isn't your main priority. I'm mainly addressing this to people that, found shoe boxes of their pictures in their parents' closet, and they want to scan them in. Now, what I think is interesting is I'm sort of the last generation that has to deal with this. These are my kids growing up, but my grandkids, most of their stuff has been captured digitally already, and then they've made prints of some of those. So it's a different game, and that's actually a problem in itself, because now they might need to make a print just to have kind of a backup of all those files. And I actually encourage people, it's not a bad idea to make 3x5s of your snapshots, because you could lose them all. And I know many people that have lost them all. It's a little harder to lose these. It takes more of a disaster like a fire. Anyway, that's kind of sidetracking there, sorry. The other thing to talk about is, what are all those other settings for? Why would I ever need 5,000 or 6,000 ppi then? Well, if you have film or negatives, it's capable of storing way more information. For example, if I had the negative of this shot here, 40 years ago when I took the picture, I could have made a 16x20 from that 35 millimeter negative. No problem. It would have looked really good, looked as long as the camera was sharp and everything. But I can't scan this original and make a 16x20 because there's just not all that detail there. If I have that negative, I can scan it higher because there is more detail there, so I can resolve it. So I can scan this 35 millimeter negative at 2400 pixels per inch, or maybe even higher, and really recover a lot of information. So if you're scanning one of these and you're going to want to make a larger print, then maybe getting a 1500 to 2000 pixel long file, maybe you want something more, 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000. Remember, that's really our goal. How big of a file do we need? We need to set that dimension. I found that a 1500 pixel file gives me everything I need. And the advantage is they're a lot smaller. And that's kind of the other problem that we've got to talk about. We'll get to that when we talk about storage here in just a minute. So in quick summary, the three questions you have to answer is, what am I going to use the file for? Then you need to decide how many pixels you need to accomplish that, which is going to be between 1,500 and 2,000 most of the time. Then you're going to decide what I might want to use it for in the future. So yeah, I might want to make an 8x10 in the future. And so let me go ahead and scan it at 600 ppi or get a 4,000 to 5,000 pixel file if I can, if my original actually has enough data to make that worthwhile. And then the third question is, how historically important is it? And that kind of changes the game, because now we're not talking about family snapshots here. And a lot of times when they're recommending stuff like on a genealogy site, they're assuming you found an old photograph of an important person that might be related to a lot of other people. And a lot of people just put little poor quality scans on these genealogy sites, not realizing that somebody else might want to download those and maybe use them in a book or something like that. So generally speaking, you might want to do a little higher quality scan there. Well, let's talk about the next one, and that's the file type, because the question is, should you save a TIFF or a JPEG? A TIFF file is a non-compressed file. And so, for example, if I were to scan this 3.5x5 at 300 ppi, I'm going to end up with about a 4.5 megabyte file. That's that's pretty large. For example, if I scan it as a JPEG at quality 70, it's going to be more like 100K. So I can store 40 of those in the same amount of space, or more importantly, I can transmit 40 of those over the internet in the same amount of time as transmitting one. Generally speaking, JPEGs are compressed, but it's a lossy process, so some pixels are thrown out, they average some together, and you can occasionally see some artifacts. The question is, why would you use a TIFF then? Well, if you're ever going to open the file in a program like Photoshop and work on it, do some restoration, you want to use a TIFF file, because if you open a JPEG and save it a JPEG multiple times, you will end up with artifacts that become visually apparent. So if you're going to work on the file, then you should save it as a TIFF, and then when you're done, maybe from that master file, you go ahead and make a JPEG that you could then put on the internet. But if you're not going to work on them, you're just going to open them up and you view them on your TV or print them. JPEG's a better way to go. As far as the compression in the JPEG, normally speaking, I use 70%. 60% once in a while, you can see some artifacting. 50%, you'll definitely see some problems once in a while, I think. Going to 100% doesn't make, that's 10 times bigger file, and there's really not a reason for that, unless you're going to open it maybe one time in Photoshop and then save it, because 100% JPEG really doesn't lose hardly any quality. And so that's one possibility, but you might as well just save it as a TIFF and do your work and then make your JPEG later. So that's kind of what I recommend. So what about these other file types like PDF and multi-TIFF and PNG? Well, those are really intended for other uses. And as I mentioned, this video is really focused on people that are trying to scan their memories into their computer. And so if you need to know what those are, that's a whole different thing. I'm not going to cover that in this particular video. As far as the final settings, color restoration usually works really well. It's surprising how well the software understands what a color was based on the color it's faded to. You can certainly test it. I found the fast photo scanner, as you saw from my interview with my daughters, does a little better job at color restoration than the Epson Flatbed. I don't understand that because they're both Epson products. I don't have any experience with other brands of scanners, but certainly try the color restoration because it can help. Generally speaking, I would leave sharpening at low because it's going to look fine. It won't really help anything to over sharpen, and you risk making sharpening artifacts which are more objectionable than even JPEG artifacts. If you're going to open it or save it as a TIFF so you can open it in Photoshop, I would recommend turning sharpening off because you're better off using Photoshop, which has much better sharpening capability than the default software. So that's kind of what I recommend there. So what about some of these other settings? Well, every scanning software is different. So Canon is different than a Epson. Let me just kind of talk in generalities. A lot of times you'll see something like enhancement. That tries to correct contrast problems. And you're just going to have to test it to see how well your scanner does. The 680 doesn't do a real good job of that compared to the 640. I usually leave that feature off. On the 640, I used it. It's not a big deal. The differences aren't that apparent. Sometimes you see things like red eye removal, which this Epson has, and a lot of the old, we had a little cube on top of an Instamatic, and red eyes were pretty well common. And again, you'll have to test it to see if it works. So descreening is a solution if you're scanning something like from a magazine or a newspaper, a book, and a lot of times you'll get what's called a moire pattern, kind of a weird herringbone pattern, and descreening helps to eliminate that if you're scanning that type of original. With a normal continuous tone photograph, that's a setting that you shouldn't need or shouldn't be using. And the last one is dust removal. In some of the cases, like this scanner, if it's got a little piece of dust on the sensor, you'll get a line through it. And it has the ability to watch for that. You need to clean it often. Flatbed scanner, you want to keep that glass clean. Dust removal is really helpful, though, if you're trying to scan negative in film because they tend to collect dust and it's really hard to get that off. So that's definitely a feature that's worth using if you're scanning some negatives or some slides. Well, I hope that was useful. I hope I answered your questions. If you have any other questions about this, like I said, this is intended for people that are generally not photographers, don't have a lot of experience. They just want to scan all their snapshots so they can let their kids and grandkids enjoy them. And I hope that this helps a little bit. Remember, what are you going to do with it? What might you want to do with it, and how important is it? Those are the 3 questions to answer. Generally speaking, 1,500 to 2,000 pixels on your longest dimension is more than adequate to make 3x5s, 5x7s, even possibly 8x10s. It's certainly good enough to show on a TV, even a 4K TV, as I showed you. And I think hopefully that'll give you an idea of making your decisions. Like I said, the big trade-off is time, and that's what you've got to decide. How much time do you really have to invest in this? Well, thanks for watching. I've got another video about this as far as how to do home movies. I found a pretty cool device that does a really pretty nice job of that. I should have that out in a couple weeks. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so when I get my next video done, you'll know. Hey, thanks for watching. See ya.